Malimutan ko na naman. So, what it is? Section 4. Okay guys, good morning po. Mr. Berano, good morning. Mr. Relebo, good morning. Miss Ablan, Miss Bainado, Talavera, Tapang, Silvestre, and Miss Season. Okay, Miss Season, let's now move on to section 415, right? Are we done with 414, Mr. Pineda? Done already with 414? Okay, so now moving on to section 415. Okay, Miss Season and Mr. Berano. Miss Season and Mr. Berano, what is the difference between mode of payment and terms of trade? Mr. Berano, you? Mr. Pineda, you? Yes, that's it. So when we speak of mode of payment, how the value or the cost or the invoice value of the shipment shall be paid. And there are two ways to pay the seller by the importer. Okay, one is LC and the other one is non-LC. Now with respect to terms of trade or terms of shipment, okay, or Incoterms, okay, it's either or how much would be or how much is the transaction value to be paid or to be remitted by the buyer to the seller. It's either Group E, Group F, Group C, or Group D. When I say Group E, it's export. When I say Group F, FOB. And when I say Group C, CFR. And when I say Group D, DDU, delivered at place or Okay, delivered and delivered duty paid. So, apat na grupo po siya. X, pare-pares lang po yan. X work, X factory. Pag F naman po, FOB, FCA, FAS. Pag group C naman po, CFR, CPT, CIP, or CIF po. So, yung group D po, yung po yung date or delivered at place, at saka yung isa, delivered duty paid po. Yung po yung pag-uusapan ng dalawa kung magkano ang babayaran ni buyer sa seller po. Okay? Now, another distinction between modes of payment and terms of trade or terms of shipment or Incoterms, mode of payment is developed by the Uniform Customs and Documentary for credits po. Uniform Customs and Practice for documentary credits. It is a international association which develops what or how the payment shall be remitted by the buyer to the seller. Now, insofar as Incoterms is concerned, it is not developed by UCP but developed by the ICC, otherwise known as International Chamber of Commerce. So, yan po ang made or mode of the distinction between mode of payment and terms of trade. Mode means how to pay, and terms of trade is what po, how much and what is to be paid. Kung paano po babayaran, that's mode of payment. Kung magkano po ang babayaran, that's terms of trade. Okay, mode of payment is developed by UCP, while terms of trade or terms of shipment is developed by the International Chamber of Commerce. Claro, guys? Let's now move on to the following mode or the following mode of payment. Number 1 is letter of credit. That's page 209 of your CMTA. Number 2 is document against payment. Number 3 is document against acceptance. Number 4 is direct remittance. Number 5 is advance payment or telegraphic transfer. And number 6 is the open account arrangement. So these are modes of paying the seller by the buyer. So kung paano po babayaran, ang normal mong practice, ang regular po is LC. And the rest are non-LC. I'm sure you know what is the effect if it is LC and if it is non-LC. Wala po tayong bank charge pagka po non-LC. Pagka po LC, meron po tayong bank charge with respect to computation of the landed cost. Klaro, guys? Klaro po? Klaro po, guys? So that's very basic. 415 po. Okay, the mode of payment is developed according to international standards. By whom? By who? ICC. Okay, or mode of payment is developed by UCP. It is in accordance with international standards. While terms of trade is developed by ICC and it is also international standard. So yun lang po ang section 415. How to pay and how to remit it and what is going to be paid is all about section 415 po. Maliwanag po? Maliwanag po? Maliwanag po? Okay. Miss Season, can you distinguish to me what is the difference between mode of payment and mode of shipment? Miss Silvestre? Okay, so therefore, if it is mode of payment, we refer to LC or non-LC. If it is mode of shipment, it's either it is to be shipped via air or via sea. Maliwanag po? Let's now move on to section 416. Mr. Ms. Tapang, 416, please. Ms. Tapang, 416, please. Ms. Painado, section 416, please. Ms. Painado, section 416, please. Mr. Verano. Yes, go ahead, 416, please. Okay, let me explain that. Question is this. Who may ask for samples of imported goods? It's obvious. The customs officer. Customs officer conducting the physical examination of the goods can ask sample or samples of the goods. And whenever the customs officer asking or ask for samples of goods examined, okay, the samples should be properly acknowledged and covered by an acknowledgement receipt. That proves or that will prove that an specimen or sample has been taken by the customs officer. Tatanggapin niya yung sample, pero mag-i-issue siya ng resibo or an acknowledgement receipt to be given to the representative or the declarant importer. Kinuha ko itong sample na ito from your importation, then I will give you an acknowledgement receipt. Meaning that I have taken samples from this importation and to be evidenced by the acknowledgement receipt. Who signs the acknowledgement receipt? Of course, the officer who took the samples. Maliwanag po. Now, the sample shall be kept for a reasonable period of time. In other words, it shall be kept and retained within the reasonable or within a reasonable time. Pagkatapos pong magamit na yung samples, it has to be returned. Meaning, pagkagamit po ng samples, pag nakita na po yung sample, it can be retained and kept by the customs officer within a reasonable time. 1 month, 2 months, pwede po. As long 1 month or 2 months is considered within reasonable period of time po. Maliwanag po. So, hindi po pagka kumuha ng samples po, kanya na po yun. Hindi po ibabalik niya po yun doon po sa pinagkunan niya ng samples. Of course, the importer po, ibabalik niya yun. Okay, next. Now, insofar as taking of sample is concerned, the quantity and value of the samples taken from the imported goods shall be noted in the specific box of goods declaration. If this is the goods declaration, look at this. Nakikita nyo ba yung illustration ko? Guys, makinig. If this is the front page, ito po yung front page, sa back page po niya, nakalagay po, okay, doon sa back page po ng goods declaration, the quantity and value of what has been taken as samples shall be noted at the back page. Meron pong area doon, nakalagay po doon yung customs examiner at nakalagay po doon sa likod doon kung ilang piraso, how much was the value of the samples taken from the importation that is being the subject of examination and assessment. Lalagay po doon sa likod. Sa harap po, wala kayong makikita na kumuha ng samples. Doon po sa likod po, sa back page po ng goods declaration. Nakalagay po yun doon. Okay? Now, Mr. Berano, if you were the customs officer, okay, if you were the customs officer, you ask for samples from an importation. Now, what's the reason why are you asking for samples? Okay, so therefore, when Mr. Berano, as customs officer, can you ask samples po? When? When can you ask? As customs officer, can you always ask for samples of items imported? Can you always? Mr. Pineda, can you always ask samples? Yes, there are some instances and circumstances that the examiner or the officer cannot ask samples. This is not mandatory. This is not compulsory. So therefore, this is not subject to the discretion of the customs officer. When goods to be classified are common or regular goods or regular items, what's the reason of asking sample? Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Kung ang item naman is not a new item and regularly arriving into the Philippines or regularly imported into the Philippines, what is the reason for asking samples? So therefore, Mr. Berano, the answer there is not. The examiner cannot always ask for samples of the goods. Hindi basta ba, hindi pwedeng, penging samples, hindi pwede po. When the customs officer asks for samples, there must be reason. And one of the reason is this. The items in question that being asked for sample is a new item. And normally, if it is a new item to be introduced in the Philippine market, it is not yet classified or specifically classified in the book. Another reason is the item is difficult to classify because the item consists of chemicals po. Difficult, new item, difficult to classify, and number 3 po is difficult to appraise and determine the value. If the officer or the customs officer can establish any of those reasons, then there would be a valid purpose for asking a sample. But if he or she cannot establish any of those, the customs officer cannot ask samples. Klaro, Mr. Berano? So there are 3 reasons why customs officer asks for samples. Okay, 1. Okay, the item is a new one. Number 2, it is difficult to classify. Number 3, it is difficult to appraise. So remember the rule. When a customs officer asks for sample, the customs officer cannot just ask samples for every shipment. there must be valid reason why the customs officer is asking samples. Okay? And whenever a customs officer asks for samples, there are conditions. One, it must be acknowledged. A receipt should be issued by the officer. And the sample, or number two, is that the samples can only be retained within a reasonable time or period of time. What do you mean by reasonable period of time? Mr. Pineda? Okay. So therefore, that reasonable period of time is open for questioning. As long the purpose for which the sample is taken has already been served. Kung pinadala yan sa isang expert or sa isang laboratory for analysis, at natapos na yung analysis, then the sample should be returned because the taking of samples has already been, or the purpose of taking the sample has already been served. Kung gusto nilang mapa-analyze, mapa-laboratory yan, after the result or after the laboratory analysis, dapat ibalik na. That is within reasonable period of time. Pagkatapos po ng analysis, pagkatapos po ng result ng analysis at nailabas na, there is no reason for the officer to retain it. Actually, it has to be returned. Now, with respect to marking and labeling of samples, it is also required. Kung saan po kinuwang importation yung samples na yan, it must be also noted. Kung nakalagay po sa plastic yung sample, the plastic wherein the samples are contained should be marked not only the quantity and value, but should be also marked where or which particular importation the samples were taken po. Kung saan pong shipment po kinuha yung samples. Okay? Maliwanag po, ibig sabihin po niyan, pag kumuha ka ng sample at nilagay mo sa plastic, yung plastic na yan, nakalagay po dyan, kung kailan kinuha, the quantity and value. So, yung quantity and value po, nakalagay po sa likod ng back page. Pero po yung plastic na pinaglalagyan ng samples po, dapat nakalagay din po yung quantity and value and which importation or in which importation the samples were taken. Kailangan ibalik yan after a reasonable period of time. When samples are taken from an importation, it is not, or the sample is not the property of the government. It remains to be the property of the importer. Ms. Sison, do you have any question? Okay, that's very basics. Let's now move on to section 417. When a vessel sinks, or when a vessel sinks, when a vessel engaged in foreign trade sinks, or when an aircraft engaged in foreign trade crash, normally po, merong pong magsusurvive. Magsusurvive po, okay, let's not talk about people who will survive. Let's talk about people or cargoes or properties that will survive and would be salvaged or saved. Sa barko po, pag lumubog po yan, normally po, meron pong matitira dun sa barko na pakikinabangan pa. Not only the part of the vessel, of course, cargoes on board the vessel, kasama pong lumubag yung kargamento doon sa barko. Pakikinabangan pa po yun. Okay? Now, sa eroplano po, normally po, pag nag-crash po yung eroplano, kaunting-kaunti na lang po ang pakikinabangan. Meron pong matitirang yung pakpak ng eroplano or gulong ng eroplano or kargamento, maaari pong mag-survive or ma-save. Pero normally po, when an aircraft crashes, normally po, wala na pong halos pakikinabangan. Unlike when a vessel sinks, marami pa pong pakikinabangan. When vessel or aircraft are wrecked within the Philippines, within Philippine territory, pagka po nasa ibang bansa, wala po tayong pakialam. Okay? So, pagka po sa ibang bansa, and that vessel or aircraft is engaged in foreign trade, doon po nag-crash sa ibang bansa, outside of our territory, or the vessel sink outside of territory, then this one is not applicable. Okay? But later on, it will be also applicable later on. So when vessels or aircrafts are wrecked, the word wreck means it's either it sink or it crash. Within the Philippines, the original owners or consignee of the cargo. Sino po yung original owner? Of course, if I were the importer listed as the owner or consignee, I am the original owner. Now, if I have already abandoned the goods because the goods are totally wrecked or completely destroyed, I would be abandoning it and I would be filing a claim against the insurance company. So, if the insurance or underwriter pays me for the value of my goods, the underwriter or insurance company steps into the shoes of the importer. The underwriter, the insurance company, becomes now the importer or the owner of goods. Okay? Maliwanag po. So, in case the original owner or underwriter, okay, wants to claim it, and release it from the BOC, then the original owner or underwriter may ask that the goods saved from a shipwreck or aircraft wreck, the same be forwarded, okay, to its original destination. Now, let me illustrate to you how is this. If this is Port of Manila, okay, and the goods came from, let's say, Korea, South Korea. And while passing, or the vessel is passing this area, assuming lang po, no? This area is Port of La Union. And the vessel sink here within the territorial jurisdiction of Port of San Fernando, La Union. Hindi mismo sa San Fernando, hindi mismo doon sa La Union, but within the territorial jurisdiction of Port of San Fernando, La Union. Nasaan yung kargamento? Nandito po. Nandito po na save. Andito rin po yung pinakabarko. Dito lumubog. Within the territorial jurisdiction of La Union. Now, what's the original destination of the cargo and the vessel? Port of Manila. So if Mr. Pineda is the original owner and Miss Season is the underwriter, okay, goods saved from this may be forwarded to its original, okay, destination. There is no need for the goods to enter or to be entered at Customs La Union. Hindi na po kailangan. As long, okay, there is approval of the District Collector of Customs of La Union, then the cargoes recovered or claimed by the original importer or abandoned cargoes being claimed by the insurance company or underwriter, it may be forwarded from this point to its original destination. Pwede po yun. Hindi na po kailangan dalhin dito yung kargamento or hindi na po kailangan kumuha ng clearance. Ang kailangan lang po is to seek the approval of the District Collector of Customs concerned, and that is what? The District Collector of Customs of San Fernando, La Union. Okay. So, ibig sabihin po, dito po kukuha ng approval, but no need that the goods be entered, meaning hindi ka na magpapile ng goods declaration dito. Okay? Only approval of the District Collector of Customs is required here. Then after, the District Collector of Customs La Union approves the forwarding of what has been saved from this point up to this point, then the BOC or the CMTA allows the forwarding. Now, however, before approval or before allowing goods saved from a shipwreck, then there is a need to list down what are those to be forwarded. In other words, when goods recovered from a shipwreck here are or is approved by the district, the approval or the forwarding shall be made only upon listing of the cargoes to be forwarded from this point to this point. And that listing shall be contained in a cargo manifest. So yung galing po sa South Korea na manifesto, mawawala na po yon kasi po lumubog na po yung barko at hindi na po kumpleto yung cargo manifest na yon dahil yung iba po hindi na mare-recover. So, when goods are saved, only those goods saved to be forwarded from this point to this point shall be covered by a manifest po. Kasi yung dati pong manifesto from South Korea to Port of Manila, hindi na po kumpleto yung kargamento. Kaya po, mababaliwala yun. Kaya po, kung ano lang ipo-forward from this point, yun po ang covered ng panibagong cargo manifest. Ms. Sison, go ahead. Second paragraph, please. Okay, Miss Season, stop from there. What do you mean by remains? Remains upon the aircraft, remains upon the vessel. Yes, I know that. Sa aeroplano po, when an aircraft crashes, normally po, halos walang matitira. But when a vessel sinks, di naman po siya sumasabog, unlike aircraft, meron pong matitira. And that cargo or that part of the vessel which has survived or which are saved is called remain. or remains po. Now, what do you mean by remains, Miss Season? Mr. Relebo, what do you mean by remains? Remains refers to part or parts of the vessel which has been saved. Okay? Which includes, of course, the ship store. Which includes, of course, the sea stores. So, hindi po lahat yan masisira. Unlike po sa aircraft, pag sumabog po, lahat po sira yan. But in the case of a wrecked vessel, some would be saved, such as the hull and the rigging. The hull and the rigging means what? The vessel's equipment po. Kasi po, bakal po yung mga yan kaya po magsusurvive yan. Aside from this hull and the rigging, the word remains, okay, it includes also sea stores. Stores for consumption of the crew and the vessel. Yung mga pagkain na hindi naman nasira, alak, mga ganyan, hindi naman po nasira, lalo na yung mga bote ng alak. Hindi po basta masisira yan kahit po lumubog yan sa tubig or sa dagat. Another is equipment such as sails. Yung mga lumang barko nung araw na nilalagyan pa ng parang bandera. Nakikita niyo siguro yung mga yate or yung mga small boat na meron parang flag. That sails. Ropes and anchors or chain anchors po. Magsusurvive po yan. And since they are imported, at yung barko po, lumubog sa Pilipinas at dito po na-save yan, pag dinala po dito sa Pilipinas yan at hindi na ibabalik sa abroad, they are subject to duties and taxes. Now, if I were the owner of the wrecked vessel and I would like to send it back, the remains po, ipapadala ko po kung saan galing. Kung may-ari po ng barko or the vessel is registered with the South Korean government and the owner is also there, then to avoid paying the duties and taxes dito sa Pilipinas on the remains, then I would rather choose to send and ship the remains where the vessel came from or where the vessel is registered. In other words, the option now belongs to the owner of the vessel. Pag dinala mo sa Pilipinas as remains or dinala mo dito sa Pilipinas as remains of a wrecked vessel, then it is imported. Bayad ka ng duties and taxes. Now, if you don't want to bring it into the Philippines, then second option is to export those remains. But before the same shall be exported, there must be an approval by the Bureau of Customs. Pag dinala mo dito, bayad ka. Kasi imported po Pag pinalabas mo, pinadala mo sa South Korea, binalik mo doon, you want to export the remains, then hindi ka magbabayad ng duties and taxes. That's it. Simple as that. When you want to bring it into the Philippines, then you file the corresponding consumption entry, goods declaration, and you pay the duties and taxes because although they were remains of a wrecked vessel, then that is imported. The Bureau will go after the duties and taxes. If you don't want that, then the owner of the vessel or the owner of the aircraft can ask the approval or permission of the BOC and allow them to export from this area to South Korea, where the vessel is registered and where the owner is holding office. Kung nasaan siya. Ganun lang po kasimple yan. Okay? So, therefore, the wrecked vessel, kaya po hindi sinasabi yung the remains of a aircraft, normally po kasi walang natitira. Pero dapat po kasama kasi po sinabi doon sa unang part ng provision eh. Kaya lang po, ang sinabi dyan, the remains of a wrecked vessel, okay, shall include not only its hull and rigging. The equipment po. It includes also sea stores, equipment, and sea stores, okay, sails, ropes, and anchor. Siguro nagtataka, ba't vessel lang ang binabanggit? Kasi po, pag aeroplano po, normally po, wala pong matitira. Siguro naman, Mr. Verano, kung sakasakali naman, no, knock on wood. Mr. Verano, which one would you like to be on board? Wrecked vessel or crashing aircraft? Why? No. What I'm asking is, when you have the option, nakasakay ka, bumabiyahe ka, and there was a wreck, there was a crash. Which one would you like to be on board? A vessel or an aircraft? Why vessel? Sa vessel ba may pag-asa ka? Hindi ka muna, I'm asking, may pag-asa ka ba? Pagka ikaw nakasakay doon, may pag-asa ka pa? Tama ba? What about aircraft? May pag-asa ba? Wala na. No, I'm asking. When there is accident, vessel or aircraft, which, wala na. What about vessel? Meron pa. So, which one would you prefer to be on board? Aircraft or vessel? Okay. What about you, Mr. Pineda? Vessel. Mr. Relebo? Bakit naman, Mr. Relebo, aircraft? Wala nang babayaran. Miss Silvestre? Vessel. Mr. Lavera? Miss Pinyon? Miss Painado? Saan? Barko o aeroplano? Again, Mr. Prelebo, what is your answer? Aircraft. Why? Aircraft? Kasi para wala nang bayaran. Whether aircraft or vessel, as long the person or the passenger is insured, may babayaran po ang insurance. Kasi covered po siya. Now, what I'm asking is just this. If I would be asked, which one I would like to be on board, I would prepare an aircraft. Why, Mr. Relebo? Kasi po sa barko, killing me softly pa eh. Do you agree, Mr. Pineda? Okay. And in the end, doon ka rin naman naabutin. Tama. Mr. Relebo, sa aeroplano ka pa rin? Tama ba? Yes. Mr. Pineda, kung sa aeroplano, at least, sandali lang, tapos na kagad yung paghihirap mo. Right, Mr. Pineda? Sa barko, titikman-tikman ka pa ng pating. Unti-unti ka pa, lulunurin ka pa. O, di ba, ang hirap nun? Kung mamamatay lang, matay ka agad. Ayoko na. Metik ka, matay na kagad. Hindi yung pahirapan ka pa. Let's now move on to section 418. Okay? No, tandaan mo yan. Kung mamimili ka, Mr. Verano, at doon din ang dating mo, gusto mo ba yung may torture pa? Ay, hindi na. Doon na lang ako kagad sa instant po. Wala nang paghihirap, then it's goodbye, cruel word. Okay? So, sabi nga nyo, you have point na doon kayo. Okay? Next please. 418 please. Miss Talavera. Okay, can you define to me what is derelict or derelicts? What are derelicts? Derelicts? Sir Verano, do you agree with the definition of Ms. Talavera regarding derelicts? Oh, can you tell Mr. Verano or Mr. Verano, can you tell Mr. Talavera what is all about derelicts? Okay, so derelicts are those goods abandoned and saved po. The word derelicts means they were abandoned and saved. And derelicts apply to cargoes or goods saved either from a shipwreck. Okay? Actually, nakalagay lang dyan, shipwreck eh. Okay? Saved from a vessel that has sunk. So what is now the rule? Derelicts and all goods recovered from sea or from abandoned wreck shall be under the jurisdiction of the port where the goods arrive. Ms. Hison, who has jurisdiction? Saan po? Philippine. Ang daming ports po eh. Saan ba lumubog? Ito po. So therefore, who has jurisdiction over derelicts and goods recovered from shipwreck or abandoned po? Saan po ang jurisdiction? Sino po ang may jurisdiction? Is it the District Collector of Port of Manila or District Collector of San Fernando, La Union? So where the goods first arrive or where they casted ashore, kung saan po sila inanod, kung dito po sa La Union, then La Union District Collector has jurisdiction over the goods, over the derelicts po. Okay? If District Collector of Customs La Union shall have jurisdiction, then that District Collector shall also have the power and jurisdiction to retain it, to be in their or to be in his or in her custody. So kung si Gian Pineda ang District Collector ng La Union at dito po inanot sa area na to yung derelicts, then District Collector Pineda has jurisdiction over it. And District Collector Pineda has the power to keep and to retain it. Ms. Lison, assuming it is kept by District Collector Pineda for a period of time and no one claims it, the original owner or the underwriters or even the salvor is not claiming it, what will now happen to the goods? Okay, so in case the original owner, original or the underwriter or salvors who saved it while floating in the sea, and it is not claimed by any of those persons that I have mentioned, the property becomes what? A property of the government. Not the property alone of the district collector, of course. The property of the government po. Okay? So, when goods are saved from here, hindi naman po pwedeng sagipin mo yan ng bangka or ng lalanguyin lang. Hindi po tao yon na lalanguyin mo lang at para masave mo siya. In other words, class, if the location where the goods are saved is far from Customs District of La Union, then the movement of goods saved from this area to Port of La Union, then it shall be either, okay, save or it shall be moved through either a barge or a lighter or even a fishing vessel. Okay? And what has been saved to be moved from this place to the District Collector of Customs Port of La Union, it shall be covered also by a manifest. Kung dito, papunta dito, may manifesto ka, hindi mo na dadalhin dito, dito mo na lang dadalhin, then it shall be covered also by a manifest. Okay? Address and the manifest is not anymore addressed to the court collector here already. Okay? Now, if you were the customs officer nearest at the scene or nearest to the scene where the wreckage took place and where the saving or salvaging took place, you have a duty as a customs officer. So what is your duty, Miss Season, as customs officer near at the scene of the accident or the wreckage? Miss Season, I'm asking you. Immediately, the customs officer shall take charge. Normally, sino po yan? It's either a customs inspector or customs senior boarding officer. Either of these two shall immediately go to the place where the wreckage took place and where the salvaging took place. Ikaw ang bahala dyan. And after going there and after conducting the necessary operation or standard operating procedures, the customs officer shall immediately report the incident or what happened to the district collector of customs. So kung kahit nasaan ka man, you're not on duty as customs officer, nasa bahay ka lang, nakita mo merong ganun, you have to go there immediately. Because that's what the law is, mandating or ordering the customs officer nearest at the scene. Ibig sabihin yan, kahit nasabi mo Sabado yung nangyari, Linggo yan nangyari, punta ka doon. Then, immediately, wag mo sasabihin, wala naman akong pasok ngayon, ba't ako pupunta dyan? No. The law says, immediately, you have to go there. And immediately, you have to report, okay, the case or the incident either to the district collector of customs or to the nearest customs office po. So, yun po ang trabaho ng isang customs officer. Okay, next please, Mr. Relevo. In order to prevent Okay, so yung kargamento po dito po na i-save. So isasakay po yan sa lighter or barge or a fishing vessel to be transported from this place to Customs District of La Union. And when goods saved are transported from this point to this point, it shall be covered by a cargo manifest from here to here. Now, kung ikaw po nakatira dito, sa banda rito po, dito ka sa bandang, dito ka nakatira, and ikaw ang pinakamalapit po dito, then you go there as customs officer and take charge of what has been saved. And immediately report it to the District Collector of Customs or to the nearest customs office. Now, in order to prevent the government from being defrauded, okay, the District Collector of Customs of Port of La Union shall be representing another customs officer to do the following things. 1, examination of what has been saved and inventory of what has been saved. Para bang tingin nyo, no? Mambihira naman tong customs. Lumubog na nga yung barko. Parang yung examination, what's the purpose of examination and inventory of goods, Mr. Pineda? Mr. Pineda? Yes? What is the purpose of District Collector of Customs in sending a representative regarding the salvage goods? A customs officer shall be sent by the District Collector of Customs to represent him or her regarding salvage goods. And what's the work of the customs officer to be sent as representative? Anong trabaho? Anong gagawin niya doon pagpunta niya doon sa na-save? Okay, number 1, that customs officer shall conduct examination and inventory of what has been saved. Tarang unfair, no? Lumubog na nga yung barko, si customs officer, no? For what purpose is the examination and inventory of the goods? What is the purpose of the district collector or customs officer in examining and inventorying the goods? Is there anyone who would like to respond? So, when there is an attempt to commit fraud, the person trying to commit fraud is trying to avoid or avoiding what? Yes, avoid the duties, or that person trying to commit fraud regarding what has been saved without examination and inventory, then that person is trying to avoid the payment of duties and taxes. Siguro isipin ninyo, no? Lumubog na nga, tapos na-save lang, pagbabayarin pa rin? Yes, because they are imported. I'm sure, magtataka kayo, normal lang yun eh. That's the work of the Bureau of Customs. What is imported? When you import, then you pay the duties and taxes. That's it. Now, Ms. Season, how would a person under this paragraph can commit fraud? How would a person commit fraud regarding what has been saved and saved from the wrecked vessel? Paano niya madadaya? Okay, that's one thing. That's one way. Another? Wala kang may isip. Miss Silvestre, you? Ang tago nila. Okay. Pwede kung ako yung tao, sabihin ko, ang nasave po, totally wreck na. Wala na pong pakinabang. Junk na po. Junk value na. Pwede ko ba sabihin yun, Miss Season? Pwede ko ba sabihin, 20 lang ang nasave, but ang totoo, 50 ang nasave. Can I do that? When I do that, when I do those things you mentioned and Miss Silvestre mentioned, I am trying to commit fraud against the government, right? That's the reason why a customs officer should be there to verify what has been saved by making an examination and inventory. That's the purpose. Kasi sabihin mo, ilang na-save mo dyan? Kung hindi pinuntan, sasabihin lang nung nag-save, 20 lang. But sa totoo, 50 ang na-save. Or sasabihin niya, 20 ang na-save, talagang 20. Kaya lang po, yung 15 po, sira na po lahat. Yung 5 na lang po pakikinabangan. So therefore, ang magiging basis ng customs for the duties and taxes would be 5 instead of 20 because of non-examination and non-inventory. Sabi ni Miss Season, pinalitan. Pwede rin po. So those are the reasons why a customs officer should be also going there to make the necessary examination and inventory of goods saved from a wrecked vessel. Ms. Tapang, next paragraph please. Ms. Tapang. Si Miss Tapang ba nag-drop na? Naka-enroll ba si... kasi wala sumasagot eh. Okay, ulitin ko ha. Miss Tapang, ganito po basahin yan. The relicts and goods saved from or recovered from or salvaged from foreign cargo or aircrafts recovered from wreck, from sea or wreck, are prima facie dutiable. Ibig sabihin po dyan, lumubog, lumutang, at naisalba, dutiable and taxable pa siya. That's it. Simple as that. Why? Because they are reported. Now, if the owner claims it, taga Maynila yung owner, nagpunta po ng La Union. Did you get? Are you getting me, Mr. Relevo? Mr. Relevo? Yes, from the owner or the consignee is located in Manila and the goods belonging to him were recovered here. Pwede siya pumunta ng La Union. Tama ba? And the goods belonging to that importer from Manila, under the law, it is prima facie dutiable and taxable. Kahit na sabihin mo pong na-save lang yun. Aba, imported po yan. Bayad ka po. So therefore, if that person proceeds here from Manila to Port of La Union, that person or that owner of the goods saved from a wreck, either from sea or air, that person who is the owner may file either a consumption entry. O pagka nag-file ka ng consumption entry dito, bayaran mo yung duties and taxes dito. Did you get it? Tsaka ka lang palalabasin yung salvage goods. Now, if you don't want consumption entry, then you can file warehousing entry. Okay? Maliwanag po? Maliwanag po? So therefore, pag nagpunta ka dito, nandito yung importer, nagpunta dito, the importer can claim the goods by filing either a consumption entry or warehousing entry, as if it is an ordinary importation. Yun nga lang po, impis na dapat doon ka magpapile, dito ka magpapile ngayon. Maliwanag, Miss Season? Miss Pinyon? Okay, continue, Miss Pinyon. If claim. Okay, can you explain? Sandali lang po, sandali lang po. Pag i-explainin nga kita, kaya nga pinabasa ko sa iyo yan eh. Yes? Miss Season, matagal to, babasahin pa lang eh. Pag-aarap kayo sa akin, magbabasa na kayo. Tingnan, alam nyo naman every provision eh. Talagang gusto kong iklaro sa inyo. Pakiulit mga Miss Pinyon para ako magpaliwanag. Okay, ganito po yan. Yung kaninang illustration ko po, galing po sa South Korea, yung barko, papunta ng Port of Manila. Lumubog sa parting La Union. But this time, yung barko po, papunta ng South Korea, lumubog naman po sa La Union. Ang laman po is export. What kind of export? Of course, galing sa Pilipinas, they are what? Philippine produce or Philippine export. Lumubog po dito, natural, yung exporter, ipapabalik dito sa Port of Manila yung goods na isinakay niya for export. Hindi nakarating ng South Korea. Right? Miss Pinyon. Tama po ba? Now, since dito lang po lumubog, ibabalik po yan dito. Tama po? Okay. Or kahit lumubog yan outside the Philippine territory, as long the exporter can prove that the goods to be returned into the Philippines are of Philippine production or Philippine export, and proofs has been or have been submitted to establish that they are really Philippine exports and goods of Philippine production, then once they return to Port of Manila, they should be also, or they are to be exempt from payment of duties and taxes, and they shall be treated as reimportation of what has been re-exported or what has been exported. So, ipinalabas mo, ibabalik dito. Ngayon, ito pong nasira na si mga kargamento, hindi nga po nakarating sa pupuntahan ibabalik sa Pilipinas. Nag-request po yung exporter. But under the law po, specifically Section 104, nakalagay po sa Section 104, no? Any articles when imported into the Philippines from a foreign country shall be subject to duty upon its importation, including those previously exported from the Philippines. Ibig sabihin yan, kung in-export mo from Philippines, tapos ibinalik mo, subject to duties and taxes. But that is only a general rule. When goods are exported from the Philippines at ibinalik sa Pilipinas, okay, the general rule, bayad ka kasi imported yan, although it is a Philippine export. However, it admit section or it admit exception to the rule. And that rule is Section 800. So therefore, kung na-recover po yan dito or na-recover sa South Korea, Philippine export po yan, ibabalik dito, ang treatment po niyan, dutiable. But if the exporter can prove that these goods are of Philippine production or Philippine export, then it is only returned to the exporter because the vessel carrying the Philippine export was wrecked here. Babalik sa kanya. Now, sa customs po, imported yan. Kung galing sa ibang bansa yan, nasa recover yan. Now, if it is within the Philippines, it's alright. Madali lang pong i-prove yan na talagang yan, hindi nakarating sa pupunta niya. What if kung nakarating sa ibang bansa, doon na-recover at ibinalik dito sa sa Pilipinas? Imported na po yan. Alam mo naman ang customs, pagkagaling sa ibang bansa, lagi pong imported ang treatment because of Section 104. So therefore, if the exporter can prove by submitting pieces of evidence or proofs that the goods recovered from a shipwreck are Philippine export, then it shall be exempt from payment of duties and taxes, and it shall be treated as reimportation. So, exempt po siya. Next, please. Miss Pinyon. O yan, nakita ninyo. Foreign goods. O ano ba ibig sabihin ng foreign goods, Miss Pinyon? Kasi yung nakaraan ni lecture ko, Philippine production, Philippine export. But this one, foreign goods, means what? Imported goods. Imported po, no? Okay? Imported goods. Okay? Which were recovered. Okay? Maliwanag po. Foreign goods landed from a vessel or in distress. Yung bang itinapon because the aircraft is in distress or the vessel is in distress. That foreign goods, when sold in the Philippine market, before withdrawing it and to be sold in the Philippine market, the importer has to pay also the duties and taxes. So, bayad ka. Okay, so imported dyan. Tapos, itinapon dahil palubog na yung barko, na-recover, ngayon, ibibenta sa Pilipinas, natural, bayad ka. That's the rule. Next, please. So, any goods, any imported or foreign goods which were thrown, which were recovered from a shipwreck, they are prima facie dutiable. And they are subject to payment of customs duties and tax. And therefore, when these goods are sold or disposed in the Philippines, they have to pay. But before the importer of that pays the duties and taxes, the duties and taxes shall be properly computed. And the customs will do the so-called examination, appraisal, including assessment po. As if the goods will be treated or as if the goods is just an ordinary importation. Anthony? Okay na. Okay na, bumalik na. Nagkaroon lang ng interruption. Okay guys, I'm back again. Okay? Continue. Continue. Before any goods taken from a recent wreck are admitted to the customs territory, meaning the importer is asking or is filing or lodging either consumption entry or warehousing entry. It shall be first appraised, it shall be first examined, appraised, and the salvaged goods shall be subject to either appraisal, examination, and of course, computation of duties and taxes. Now, once the importer or owner disagree, biro mo na-recover lang yung goods, i-clear via consumption entry dito, sa La Union. The problem is, nagkaroon pa ng issue on the appraisal and classification. Parang ang lupit ng Bureau of Customs, no? Na-recover na nga lang. Itinaas pa yung classification, itinaas pa yung appraisal. Now, the importer disagrees with the findings of the customs examiner or appraiser. Now, if that clearance or clearing of salvaged goods is treated to be an ordinary importation, pag may issue po regarding the value or the classification of the salvaged goods, then the importer can make an appeal. Kung sakasakaling desisyonan na tama ang customs, mali ka, Mr. Importer, then as an importer of salvaged goods, I will also have the same right to appeal. Kung sabihin, tingin ko, mali siya. Biro mo salvage goods, an issue of classification and an issue of appraisal. Para bang sabi ni ganito, ito lang po dapat ang value dyan. No, ito po ang value dyan, sabi ni customs officer. So, pagka po na-desisyonan at tama po yung customs, then the importer can appeal the case as if it is an ordinary importation. Actually, magugulat ka Bakit ganun? Okay? Talagang ganun po ang labanan Salvage goods are prima facie dutiable and taxable. Therefore, when the importer wants to release it and withdraw it from the district where it was saved and salvaged, then the importer can file either a consumption entry or a warehousing entry. So, if it is a consumption entry or warehousing entry, there must be examination, there must be appraisal, and there must be assessment of duties and taxes. And if the importer of the salvaged goods or salvaged or saved goods does not agree with the findings of the customs appraiser or officer, then pwede siya mag-apila as if it is treated as ordinary importation po. Okay? Maliwanag, Mr. Pineda? Abandoned goods, i-clear sa La Union ng consumption. Pagka i-clear mo ng consumption yan, there must be examination, there is also appraisal, and there is also classification, and there is also payment or assessment and payment of duties and taxes. Ngayon, pag hindi ka satisfied, Mr. Importer, then you can appeal. So, parang ordinary importation siya. Pero extraordinary kasi bakit? Hindi naman talaga dito papunta yung goods. Dito lang po siya inanod. Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Yes. Pero kung dito po, hindi naman siya inanod, at nakarating naman po yung barko, hindi naman po lumuhod, nakarating sa Port of Manila, nagkaroon din po ng issue on valuation and classification. Ganon din po ang treatment. Kung hindi po sangayon si importer doon sa findings, then the importer can appeal. Ganon din po dito, kung hindi rin po siya sangayon. Did you get it, Mr. Pineda? Ms. Rivera, did you get it? Ms. Rivera, please read the last part. Okay, if it is Philippine goods or goods of Philippine production or Philippine export, as long the exporter can establish that they are Philippine or they are of Philippine production or they are Philippine export products, then yung pagbalik po ng recovered na export, they are exempt from payment of duties and taxes as long the exporter can establish that these goods saved from a shipwreck are really, okay, Philippine origin or Philippine export. So, pag ibinalik, na-save sa ibang bansa or na-save dito sa atin, pagbalik dito sa Pilipinas or naibalik dito sa Port of Manila, as long the exporter or the owner of the export products can prove that it is an export products or are of Philippine production, they are exempt from payment of duties and taxes. Okay? Pero napaka-unfair naman ano. Kung ikaw ang may-ari nung export, Mr. Pineda, hindi na nga nakarating doon sa pupuntahan at na-save lang, pero pagdating dito, ang treatment, imported siya. Dapat magbayad ng duties and taxes. Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Napaka-unfair, no? The problem is, that is in Section 104. Kahit na galing dito sa Pilipinas at nakarating sa ibang bansa at binalik dito, ang treatment po ng customs, that is important. Kasi nakalagay po doon, even though, including those previously exported from the Philippines, are considered imported. O, kita nyo na, no? So, dito po, ang pinag-uusapan po, export goods that were salvaged or saved at ibinabalik ngayon dito sa Pilipinas. The exporter shall not be paying the duties and taxes or shall be exempt from payment of duties and taxes as long the exporter can submit proof that they are really of Philippine production or they are Philippine export. Hindi sila imported at ibinabalik lang sila dahil na-recover sila. Miss Rivera, pakibasa mo nga yung last part ulit. Paki-explain mo nga yan, Miss Rivera. Miss Rivera. Ayoko nang wait lang, matagal. 70 na kagad yung pagkaganyan. Pinag-i-explain ko na. Mr. Pineda, you? Ayoko nang matagal. Tinawag kita, natural. Pag tinawag kita, tsaka pagpapasok kayo sa akin, natural. Magbabasa kayo. Yes, go ahead. Mr. Pineda, no part. Ms. Silvestre, do you agree with the explanation of Mr. Pineda? Is the explanation complete? Sige, go ahead. Okay, pakikumpleto, Ms. Silvestre. Mamaya ka na, Mr. Pineda. Tingnan natin sagot ni Ms. Silvestre. Parang magulo ah. Okay, Mr. Pineda, you? Okay, Mr. Relevo, you? Ms. Season? What, Miss Sison, what do you mean by Philippine vessel or Philippine aircraft? Yes, that's it. So therefore, if a vessel or aircraft registered with the Philippine government has been wrecked either in the Philippine waters or within our territorial sea or outside of our territorial waters, the remains, the derelicts of the vessel or aircraft when it is returned into the Philippines shall be automatic exempt from payment of duty. That's the explanation. Pakiulit nga, Miss Season. Napakiulit nga yung explanation. English po. English po. With the Philippine, hindi by. Ayusin nyo yung mga English ninyo. Sa totoo lang, graduate na kayo dapat. Kung wala lang K-12, bahiya naman kayo, no? Yes, go ahead. Philippine government. Philippine government po registered if a vessel or aircraft is registered with the Philippine government are wrecked within our territorial waters or outside of our territorial waters or foreign land, and it has been or it will be returned into the Philippines, the parts and derelict of that aircraft or vessel shall be exempt from duty. Yan lang po yan. Pag ibinalik po dito sa Pilipinas yan, kahit po nasira within the Philippines or, okay, outside of the Philippine territory, as long it is registered with the Philippine government, vessel or aircraft, okay, and what is to be returned are remains or derelicts of the vessel or aircraft that is exempt from duty. Wala ka na pong babayaran. Sir Pineda, pagka po kasi pinagbayad mo, how would you feel? Kunyari, ikaw may-ari ng barko, pinagbayad pa ng duties and taxes. How would you feel? Hindi ba? Sakit nun. Double kill, right? Double kill, right? Double murder, di ba? Biro mo, lumubog na nga yung barko ko, customs. Ang natira na nga lang po yung chain and anchors. Tapos dadaling ko dito sa Pilipinas, pagbabayarin mo pa ako. That is unfair, right, Mr. Pineda? Oh, Miss Silvestre, yung nag-crash yung eroplano, natira na lang yung dalawang gulong. Tapos nung ibinabalik ko dito, pagbabayarin pa ako, customs. Di ba unfair yun? What if yung mismo ang barko ang ibabalik? Or mismong, yung eroplano, malabo naman talagang mag-survive yun pag nag-crash. Siguradong wasak yun. Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Mr. Pineda, what if kung yung mismong barko, okay, natanggal lang po yung pinaka-propeller, pero ibabalik dito sa Pilipinas, exempted pa ba? Yung propeller wala na, pero yung halos buong barko, ibabalik, exempted pa ba? Yes, kasi po yung parts and equipments po exempted as long that parts and equipment belongs to a vessel which is registered with the Philippines. Pag yung barko mismo ibabalik, kahit lumubog, inangat, binalik sa Pilipinas, exempt pa rin po. Maliwanag? As long it is what? Registered with the Philippine government po. Next. Let's now move on to another chapter. Chapter 2 po, examination of goods. So, nakapag-file na po ng goods declaration. Nakapag-lodge na po under section 411, 412. Tama po ba? Then, nakapag-submit na po ng commercial invoice. Okay. Naintindihan ba? Nakapag-submit na ng 411 goods declaration, nakapag-lodge na po. And the goods declaration is accompanied by commercial invoice, bill of lading, airway bill. So, kaninong role yon? The importer po. Trabaho po ng importer yung area na yon. 411, 412, 413. 414 po. Now, before I proceed with examination of goods, I'd like to ask a simple question regarding 414. Miss Season, Mr. Relevo, Mr. Relevo, sa 414 muna tayo, bago tayo kasi baka mamaya makalimutan ko tong area na to eh. Mr. Relevo, o Miss Silvestre na lang, si Miss Silvestre. Miss Season and Miss Silvestre, what's the difference between a commercial invoice and non-commercial invoice? Is there anyone who would like to respond? Mr. Pineda? Okay, I'll explain it to you. Listen. If the transaction between the shipper and the importer from the Philippines is a sale transaction, then what is to be issued by the shipper or seller abroad is a commercial invoice. Pag sinabi pong may sale transaction po, there is a transfer of goods, transfer of ownership, and there is payment. Did you get it, Mr. Pineda? If it is a no-sale transaction between the shipper, seller, and the buyer, okay, there is no transfer of ownership or there is no payment. What are those no-sale transaction under 414? Meron po dyan, donation po, samples po, consignment po, lease agreement po, or loan agreement po. These are what? No sale transaction. Why there is no sale transaction? Because there is no transfer of ownership. Although the goods are shipped from origin into the Philippines, but the property remains to be the property, or the goods remains to be the property of the seller or shipper. That's why when goods are shipped into the Philippines under a no-sale transaction, normally what is issued by the shipper to the seller or to the buyer is a non-commercial invoice such as pro forma invoice. So, ibig sabihin, pagka non-commercial invoice, there is no transfer of ownership and there is no payment to be made by the buyer to the seller. But if it is a sale transaction, there is transfer of ownership and there is payment to be made by the buyer to the seller, then the invoice to be issued is a commercial one. But if there is no sale, then what is to be issued is non-commercial invoice such as pro forma invoice. Yun po ang difference. Pakiulit mo nga yung difference, Miss Rivera. And there is, aside from payment, ano pa, Miss Rivera? Pag wala pong sale transaction, pakikumpleto mo nga, Mr. Pineda, maitim yung medyo, hindi ko medyo dark yung sagot niya. Medyo gray. Yes, commercial invoice and non-commercial invoice, please. Yes? Okay, okay. So, if the transaction is a sale transaction, the seller normally issues a commercial invoice because there is transfer of payment, transfer of ownership, and at the same time payment. But if there is no sale transaction, or if the transaction is a no sale one, then what is to be issued by the seller to the buyer is a non-commercial invoice because there is no transfer of ownership and there is no payment made. So normally, what is to be issued in a no sale transaction is a pro forma invoice. Yan po yun. 419, Miss Rivera. Okay, okay, teka na. When may examination of the goods can be conducted? Kailan po dapat magkaroon ng examination? Miss Rivera. Teka muna, tinatanong ko lang, Miss Rivera, is when should the examination of goods be made? Mr. Pineda, please answer my question. Miss Rivera, nandun lang po after lodgement of the goods declaration, then comes now the examination. So, Miss Rivera, when should the examination be conducted? Sabi ni Mr. Pineda, according to section 419, after lodgement of the goods declaration. After filing of the goods declaration. Should the examination or can examination of the goods be made prior arrival or after arrival, Miss Rivera? Ano, no? Ang sagot mo? Sagot mo? Can the examination be made prior arrival or after arrival? Are you sure? Miss Pineda? Miss Rivera? Miss Rivera, you? Are you sure? Miss Mendoza? Miss Mendoza? Miss Mendoza? Yes? Is it prior or after arrival? Prior. Mr. Verano? Is it prior or after arrival? The examination. Miss Piñon? Prior. Miss Silvestre? After. Mr. Pineda? Prior or after? There is nothing to examine if the goods has not yet arrived, Miss Piñon. Ano examinin mo? Hindi pa nga dumarating, Miss Piñon. Miss Mendoza? Hindi pa dumarating. Ano examinin mo? Hangin? Miss Piñon, I'm talking to you. Wala ka pang i-examinin. Hindi pa dumarating eh. So normally, examination is conducted after arrival of the goods. Because if the goods has not yet arrived, what is it to examine? Right, Miss Piñon? Miss Piñon, sagot. And the lodgement of goods declaration, Mr. Pineda, presupposes that the goods has already arrived. Do you agree, Mr. Pineda? Yes. Kalagay po dyan, after goods declaration has been lodged, then the examination shall be immediately conducted. Meaning, if the goods declaration has been lodged, it is presumed that the goods has already arrived. Right, Mr. Pineda? Okay, Ms. Rivera, next sentence, please, or next statement, please. Ano, pakiulit mga, hindi po live po, hindi po live. Parang Mr. Pineda, sabi niya, where do you live? Parang ganun eh, no? Babaguhin ko, where do you live? Parang ganun, Mr. Pineda, ne? Mr. Pineda! Ang sabi niya kasi, live animal. Sagot ko naman, where do you live or where do you live? Sagwan eh, where do you live? Animal, where do you live or where do you live? Animal? What do you mean by priority, Miss Rivera? Uunahin. Miss Piñon, cargo or goods is non-perishable. Mr. Pineda's shipment is perishable. But it is Miss Piñon who first lodged the goods declaration. Tapos, sabi ni Customs Officer Relevo, examinin ko muna yung kay Mr. Pineda. Mr. Rivera, naririnig ko ba yung sinasabi ko? Wala akong, Miss Lib. Pangalan niya ngayon, Mr. Pineda, Miss Lib. Okay? Oh, di wow ka pa dyan, ha? Wala ka pa itinatama sa akin, ha? Miss Piñon, ang kargamento niya, non-perishable. Si Mr. Pineda, perishable. Si Mr. Relevo, ang examiner. Naunang mag-file si Miss Piñon at nahuling mag-file or mag-lodge si Mr. Pineda. Inuna ni Mr. Relevo si Mr. Pineda sa examination. Can Miss Piñon, oy, Mr. Relevo, bakit yan ang unahin mo? Can Miss Piñon complain, Miss Rivera? Bakit? Anong sabi dyan? Ano ang sabi dyan? Sige yan, live animal. Parang sinasabi mo, parang ganon. Oh, tinan mo, Mr. Pineda, live animal ka na rin pala ngayon. So therefore, Ms. Piñon cannot complain because under Section 419, perishable animal or perishable items or goods, live animals, is given the priority over non-perishable or non-live animal items. Hindi ka pwede magreklamo, Miss Piñon, ha? Miss Piñon. Mr. Relevo, meron na tayong live animals. Meron na tayong perishable goods. Mr. Relevo, are you there? Can you tell us what is this other goods? Yes po. So, aside from live animals, aside from perishable items, dangerous goods shall be also given priority. Kahit uli silang nag-lodge, they shall be, or that good shall be given priority in the examination. Uunahin po ng examiner yan because they require immediate examination. Miss Rivera again, hindi. Si Miss Silvestre naman. Next paragraph, please. Miss Silvestre, what do you mean by joint examination? Sino po yun? Give me an example. Live animal. Who shall jointly examine the live animal? Live animals po. Miss Silvestre. Miss Silvestre, you! I'm asking you. Okay, Mr. Pineda. And? No. Mr. Miss Silvestre, sabi niya, Bureau of Animal Industry. Sino pa yung isa? Yes, the BOC and the Bureau of Animal Industry. I'm just trying to point out the regulatory agency. Miss Silvestre, what if the goods to be examined are perishable foods, processed foods? Who shall jointly examine the goods? Mr. Pineda? Food and Drug Administration. Wala na pong BPAD. Bureau or Food and Drug Administration Representative and the Bureau of Customs po. Maliwanag? Maliwanag po. If it is dangerous goods, it shall be examined by the BOC plus with or jointly with a representative of a government regulatory agency which has knowledge and expertise in dangerous goods. Malamang dyan, representative from the DOST po. Ms. Piñon, next paragraph please. Jointly means there are two who will conduct the examination. One from the BOC and one from the regulatory agency, specifically if the items are regulated items. Maliwanag, Ms. Silvestre? Mr. Verano, klaro? Okay, Miss Mignon, you. As a general rule, Miss Pignon, you. Miss Pignon, ba? Ewan ko, ano ba sinasabi ko sa kanya, Mr. Pineda? Mr. Pineda, can you tell her what I'm asking her to do? Huwag mo sigawan. Hindi, parang sinisigawan mo eh. Huwag mo sisigawan. Sabihan mo ng maayos. Next time, huwag mo sisigawan, Mr. Pineda. Ha? Nakakahiya eh. Nagbumukanta ngayon tao eh. Ha? Huwag mo sisigawan. Okay, go. Yes. Teka muna mo. Sandali po. The general rule. Meaning, if it is a general rule, what does it mean, Miss Pinyon? If it is a general rule, it admits exception or exceptions po. But as a general rule, the examination of the goods shall be conducted in the presence of the declarant importer or his or her representative. That's the general rule. Bakit kaya kailangan nandun si importer, declarant, or representative? Miss Silvestre, Miss Pinyon. To assist the Bureau? Yes, maybe. Miss Pinyon, bakit? Miss Pinyon, Miss Pinyon, ang score mo sa akin, 0-3. Wala pang tumatama. Well, the purpose of the presence of a declarant or representative of the importer is fair play. To avoid suspicion, to prevent suspicion regarding the conduct of the examination. Fair po ang laro ng BOC, specifically Customs Officer. Fair means nothing has been replaced, nothing has been changed, nothing has been tampered during examination. Ms. Silvestre, that's the reason. Kasi po, pag wala po si importer, pwede po bang i-tamper of what has been examined, Ms. Silvestre? Yes, so fair play demands that whenever a customs officer conducts examination, as a general rule, the examination shall be conducted in the presence of the declarant or representative of the importer to avoid or prevent any suspicions regarding irregularity in the physical examination. Next, please. Ms. Pignon. So as a general rule, teka muna, Miss Pignon, paki-cite mo nga sa akin yung rule. Sige nga, paki-recite mo sa akin. Paki-summarize mo yung rule. Hindi ko naman sinasabing i-memorize mo eh. Gawin mo lang yung rule. Ikaw, Mr. Bakit mo kailangan memorize yan? Binabasa mo nga eh. What I want you to do, Miss Pignon, is to establish the rule. Mr. Pineda, please establish the rule. Can you establish the rule? Okay, let me do it. Let me do it. Miss Pinyon, ganito po yan. No? Kahit hindi ko po nakikita, no? As a general rule, the examination shall be conducted in the presence of the importer, declarant, or representative. Exception. Under exceptional circumstances, okay, for valid and justifiable reason, the examination can be conducted even in the absence of the importer or representative. Third rule, the rule regarding examination of goods without the presence of the declarant, importer, or representative shall be made and promulgated by the Secretary of Finance upon the recommendation of the Commissioner po. Ganun lang po kasimple yan. First rule, general. Examination shall be made in the presence of so-and-so. Second rule, the examination shall be made even in the absence of so-and-so. Okay, exceptional circumstances for valid and justifiable reason. Number 3, in case examination is allowed in the absence of so-and-so, the rule shall be promulgated by the Secretary of Finance upon recommendation of the Commissioner of Customs. Okay? Now, Miss Pinyon. Miss Pinyon. When may examination be made without the presence of the importer or representative? Kahit na wala po siya, pwedeng examinin. Anong yes po? Mr. Pineda, tinatanong ko, when po? Ang layo ng sagot eh. Sagot ko, when? Sagot niya, yes. Ano ba yun? Yes, Mr. Pineda, paki-assist mo nga si Miss Pinyon. Sabi. Okay, the examination can be made even in the absence of the importer or representative. When the goods to be examined consist of live animals, perishable goods, or other items requiring immediate examination. Yun po ang sagot, Miss Pinyon. Miss Pinyon, bakit po pagka live animals, kailangan po examining kagad at hindi na kailangan antayin yung importer para ma-witness niya or makita niya kung paano ginawa yung examination? Bakit po, Miss Pinyon? Huwag naman mamatay kagad, pumayat muna. Kasi kung mga 3 araw bago dumating yung representative or importer, malamang mangayayat yung baboy. Right, Miss Pinyon? Pag perishable naman, pag-aantayin pa yung representative, eh malamang mag-accumulate yung storage. Right, Miss Pinyon? Pagka naman po dangerous goods, baka po yung dangerous goods, eh, medyo magkaroon ng leak at sumabog, magka-problema ang customs, right? Okay. The Bureau may require the declarant to be present or to render any assistance. Ibig sabihin po niyan, the Bureau, in case the importer or representative can be present during the examination, it can be required by the Bureau. Oh, Miss Pinyon, ikaw pala ang broker. Mag-i-examine si Mr. Relevo. Can Mr. Relevo ask Miss Pinyon, dapat nandoon ka pagka in-examine ko? The answer is right. The answer is yes. Mr. Relevo can do that kasi nakalagay po dyan. Now, what's the purpose of Mr. Relevo's requiring Miss Pinyon to be there to be present during the examination. Of course, Miss Pinion would be assisting Mr. Relevo in the conduct of the examination. Pag sinabi ng Mr. Relevo, Miss Pinion, may kasama ka bang opener? Ano ba ibig sabihin ng opener, Miss Pinion? O, kung yan po nakalagay sa isang crate na gawa sa kahoy, Miss Pinion, pakibuksan mo nga yung crate na yan and I want to check it. In other words, it's not Mr. Relevo who would be opening it. It's you, Miss Pinion. Ikaw magbubukas. Or kung may kasama si Mr. Relevo, alalayan mo, Miss Pinion. Kaya nakalagay po dyan. Did you get it, Miss Pinion? Miss Season? Yes. Anong gagawin, Miss Season? Magbabatian na lang tayo. Yes, Miss Season? Sagot ka naman. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, Miss Season? Yes, sir. Anong gagawin? Ang tanong ko, tinawag kita, yes, Miss Season? Go ahead. Ang sabi niya, yes, sir. Yes, Miss Season. Go ahead. Yes, sir. The Bureau samples drawn, hindi shown. Drawn po. Samples taken shall be minimal as possible. Mr. Pineda, what do you mean by, am I correct that not always that the officer can ask samples, Mr. Pineda? Yes. As a customs officer, you cannot always ask samples. There are only instances or circumstances that a customs officer can ask for samples. Right, Mr. Pineda? What are those instances? When the goods to be, when the goods imported is difficult to classify and difficult to appraise. That would be the instance or instances that the customs officer can ask samples. Right, Mr. Pineda? Pag ordinary items, common items, not new items, can the examiner or officer ask sample? Mr. Pineda? Hindi na. Wala ka ng karapatan kasi bakit? These are ordinary items. These are common items. Right, Ms. Silvestre? Samples can only be taken from importation of goods which are difficult to classify and difficult to appraise. Ms. Season, samples please. Samples. Samples drawn. Can you explain that, Miss Season? Andiyan pala si Miss Pineda. I would like to call Miss Pineda. Yes, go ahead, please. Do you agree, Mr. Pineda? Oh, what do you mean by that, Mr. Pineda? Examination or samples po? Can you give me an example? Samples of example. Example of samples that you are talking about, Mr. Pineda. Ganun. Do you agree, Miss Season? Okay, good. Mali ka daw, sabi niya, Mr. Pineda. Okay, go ahead, Miss Season. Actually, hindi magbibigay eh. Manghihingi. Kukuha ng sample. Hindi po dapat gamitin yung magbibigay. Kung ikaw po ang customs officer, you can only ask sample in minimum quantity or minimum as possible. Nandiyan ba si Miss Roma? Is Miss Roma around? Mr. Verano? Andiyan ba? Parang wala yata dito. Ano ba yan? Nagsisipasok pa ba? Mr. Lebo, nandiyan ba si Miss Roma? Gusto kong matanong eh. Wala. Miss Mariano, are you there? Wala si... Okay. Miss Mariano? Yes? Pakipaliwanag mo nga sa akin yun. Yes, go ahead. Illustrate. Illustrate it. Truck lang ano? Isang truck na kamatis. Ang daming kamatis nun. Isang truck, Mr. Pineda. Ang dami nun. Imagine mo, ang dami nun. Okay. Do you agree, Mr. Pineda? Ganun din ba? Okay, Miss Season. Do you agree, Miss Season? Ano again? Mali ka na naman daw, sabi ni Miss Season, Miss Mariano. Ano ba yung explanation mo, Miss Season? What is minimum for you? Okay, minimum means this. Ganito lang po yan. As long the examiner or appraiser or examiner can establish the correct value and tariff classification of the goods. If it is one sample or two samples out of 10,000 items, then that is minimum. The minimum says as long the minimum number of samples can establish what is the correct value and tariff classification, then that is allowed for the officer. More than that, that is no longer minimum. Ganito lang po yan, no? Sabi nga ni Miss Mariano, ni Mr. Pineda, kung 100 itlog po yung binili, isang truck na kamatis, kahit 3 kamatis lang, pwede nang ma-establish ang value and classification. Right, Mr. Pineda and Miss Mariano? Okay. Miss Silvestre, ikaw po yung importer. Ang in-import mo po is 1,000 kilograms of swine meat. Ako po yung officer na naka-assign, Miss Silvestre. I have asked you, Miss Silvestre, pwede po bang makakuha ng sample for me to determine the correct value and classification of your swine meat? Sumagot si Miss Silvestre, yes sir, you can ask or you can ask sample and I will give you sample. Tinanong ni Miss Silvestre, ilan ang kailangan mo, Mr. Doroteo? Ang kailangan ko po, Miss, 500 kilos as samples. Payag ka, Miss Silvestre? Bakit? Hindi na po siya minimal. Hindi po siya OA. Hindi po siya minimal. It's more than minimal. Kung ikaw, Mr. Pineda, si Miss Silvestre, humihingi ako ng 500 kilos of swine meat out of the 1,000 kilograms importation, what would you think? Baka may handaan sa inyo, may kampiesta sa inyo, Mr. Doroteo. Ganun lang po kasimple. Baka iba na po yung purpose ng sample mo. Malamang may birthday sa inyo or baka naman may kasalan sa inyo. Hindi po siya OA, Miss Silvestre. It's more than minimal. Imagine 500 kilos para lang ma-establish mo kung magkano ang value at classification. It's more than minimal. 1 kilo or 2 kilograms will do. That is minimal po. Sabi nga ni Mr. Pineda, iba na daw ang purpose. Natural, may piyesta sa amin, may birthday nung ganito. Aba, 500 kilos. Aba, magkandamatay na sila doon, 500 kilos, baka hindi mo alam kung gaano karami. Eh, si Miss Mariano, hiningan ko ng Miss Mariano, samples, kalahati nung truck. Payag ka, Miss Mariano? Opo, alam nga namang hindi yung truck, yung tomato. Ayoko nung truck, gusto kalahati nung nung laman nung truck. Payag ka? Okay? Miss Pinyon. Miss Pinyon. Okay. Can you give us the two types of the examination of goods? Mr. Relebo, two types of examination. Mr. Relebo. Can you give us the two types of examination of goods? Okay, ordinary tsaka priority. Galing ah. Galing manghula. Galing manghula. Mr. Verano, two types of examination of goods. Yes po, Mr. Relebo, intrusive and non-intrusive. Pagka po physical, it's intrusive. Pagka po non-intrusive, the examination shall be made or conducted by means of X-ray or scanning machine. Now, under 420, condition for examination, pursuant to internationally accepted standard, the Bureau may adopt the so-called non-intrusive examination of goods, such as the use of one X-ray machine or scanning machine. Why non-intrusive, Mr. Pineda, Ms. Season? Yes, Ms. Season. Mr. Relebo, why non-intrusive? Okay, it is not... Pa, may sumasagot ha. Sino yung sumasagot doon? Gusto na rin mag-customs niyan? Okay, why it is non-intrusive? Because the examination shall not require the opening of the box or the container. That's why it's called non-intrusive po. It is intrusive because it requires the opening of the box, including the examination of what is contained in the box po. That's why it's called physical or intrusive examination. Lalayo na sagot ninyo, ha? Simple lang po yung tanong. As a general rule, the examination of goods shall be in accordance with the internationally accepted standards. And that, or with that, the Bureau is allowed to adopt the non-intrusive examination of goods by means of X-ray or scanning machines po. Yan po yung general rule. However, in the following circumstances, intrusive or physical examination shall be conducted. No scanning or no X-ray machine. Meaning, it is to be examined physically. There is intrusive or opening of the box. Letter A, Miss Pineda. Miss Pineda. Naglalag. Mr. Relebo, letter A, please. Number 1, or letter A. So, when the Commissioner of Customs has derogatory information that there is something wrong with the goods, okay, then the Commissioner can order the physical examination. If there is a suspicion, if there are reports received by the Commissioner, then the Commissioner can order that goods be examined physically. Yan po yung isang instance. Number 2, or letter B. Miss Pinyon. Miss Pinyon. Mr. Pineda, tagal If the shipment is covered or subject to an alert order, automatic po, that shipment shall be subject to physical or intrusive examination to verify whether the alert order is correct or not. And normally, a shipment is alerted by reason of MUM, misdeclaration, undervaluation, or misclassification. So when a shipment is covered by an alert order, then physical examination shall be conducted. Letter C. When shipment are electronically selected for physical examination. Now, ito po yun. Pakikita ko sa inyo, what are those selection? In advance po. Meron po tayong tinatawag na GL at meron po tayong tinatawag na YL at meron po tayong tinatawag na RL. What is GL, Mr. Relebo? Mr. Pineda, what is GL? What is YL? And what is RL? Ito po ang once shipment is selected as RL, there is physical examination. And when a shipment is filed under the informal entry, again, there is physical examination. Meron pa isa bago ngayon, OL, Orange Lane. Subject din po daw siya sa examination. But green lane, yellow lane, super green lane, they are not subject to examination. Only red lane, orange lane, and informal entry are normally selected for examination. Letter D, if there would be issues or controversies surrounding the goods declaration as to quantity and as to description or import clearance process, again, that shipment which has issues and controversies regarding declaration, quantity, description, and import clearance issues, then again, that goods shall be subject to a physical examination. Letter E, Mr. Pineda, when the importer or Norbury, when the importer or declarant requests for the exam, Mr. Pineda, I would be asking you, if you were the importer, which one would you like? No examination at all or with examination? Yes, no examination at all. Why? Because if there is examination, it would cause delay, right, Mr. Pineda? Right, Mr. Pineda? Yes, Miss Season, letter E. So sabi ni Mr. Pineda, if he was the importer, then he would prepare no examination at all. Right, Mr. Pineda? Yun ba yung sabi mo? Letter E, Miss Season. Sabi ni Mr. Pineda, kung pwede, walang examination. Under letter E, yung importer at yung declarant, ang nagre-request na may examine yung goods niya. Para yatang inconsistent or in conflict with the answer of Mr. Pineda, right? Bakit ganun? Ano ba to, Mr. Pineda, yung importer sa letter E? Murit ba to? Ikaw, gusto mo walang examination. Siya, gusto niya may examination. Ano ba to? Murit ba to? Hindi ba? Ikaw nga, gusto mo walang examination eh. Siya, gusto niya may examination. Ano ba to? Murit siguro to, ne? Aliyah? No, murit ba to? Hindi. Actually, it's correct. The importer or declarant request for examination. Why? Kasi po, when the goods arrive, consigned to this requesting importer, meron pong report na yung container po is nabutasan or nayupi po. Tama po ba? Maliwanag po. Ngayon, kung yan po ay nabutasan or nayupi po at during transit, some of the contents were destroyed or were lost. Let's say kung 100 ng binili mong items at tingin ni importer mukhang wala ng 100 yan, yung iba niyan nawala na, natapon na, maaring 80 na lang ang pakikinabangan dyan. Yung 10 niya, yung 20 niyan, wala. Now, to make sure, sabi nga ni Mr. Pineda, to make sure, okay, that the contents or the quantity of what has been bought will actually arrive is, of course, to make the examination of the goods. Right, Mr. Pineda? Kasi po, kung ang in-order mo, 100, at pagkatapos po ng examination, nakita na lang po 80, magkano babayaran mong duties and taxes, Mr. Pineda? Is it for 80 or is it for 100? Kung hindi mo pinag-double check, kahit 80 lang at dumating, at 100 ng order mo, dumating ang 80, ang babasihan ng customs is 100. But with examination, and they found out that 80 lang po ang dumating, kulang po ng 20. What would now be the basis of the BOC in the duties and taxes po? 80 or 100? In-examine, nakita 80. Ano magiging basis? Is it 80 or is it 100? 80. Okay. Miss Season, you. Miss Season, hindi kita marinig. Teka muna, hindi pa tapos. May tanong pa ako. Teka muna, may tanong pa ako. Now, if what has been ordered or imported is 100, and after examination, only 800 or 100 ang in-order, 80 only arrived. What procedure are you going to apply for the payment of 80 instead of 100? No. What I'm asking is in the reduction of the duties and taxes to be paid based on 80, not based on 100, what is that procedure? What is that remedy? Ano no? Appeal, katulad ni Miss Pinyon. Appeal yan. Tinan mo itsura ni Miss Pinyon. Yan ang appeal. Yan si Miss Mariano, si Miss Beautiful. Yan ang appeal. Mr. Pineda, what remedy is that? Abatement po, Miss Season. Reduction in whole or in part before payment is made. Pangit naman po, pag nagbayad ka ng for 100, natanggap mo lang 80 lang kasi na-inspect right? Or na-examine, right, Ms. Season? Ngayon, kung nabayaran mo na, tapos saka mo lang nalaman 80 ang dumating instead of 100, what remedy is available to you now, Ms. Season? Yun, at least alam ninyo what is the purpose of the importer or declarant in requesting the examination of the goods. Normally, the importer would prepare no examination, right, Mr. Pineda? Normally, the importer would prepare no examination, right? Yes. Ako importer, ayoko na examination, but this time it is the importer who is requesting the bureau to examine the goods because the importer has doubt because of the condition of the container, because of the condition of the packages. Parang may diferensya yung laman, kaya pinai-examine niya. Continue, Ms. Season. So therefore, when the importation is consigned to authorized economic operators such as exporters, PESA locators, then the commissioner may exempt them from physical examination. So pagka ikaw, if you are unauthorized economic operator, then the BOC commissioner may exempt your shipment from physical examination. So who are these authorized economic operator, exporters, PESA locators, logistics providers? Marami po sila. Okay? Another thing is physical examination, when required, shall be done or conducted in expeditious manner. Pwede bang pag-antayin si importer? Pwede bang pag-antayin? Mamaya ka na, Mr. Importer. No. When it is required, when the officer is tasked to examine it, then he or she must examine it immediately. The examiner or customs officer cannot ask, magantay ka, Mr. Importer. Hindi po. Ang sabi po dun sa last paragraph, the examination or the physical examination when required shall be conducted in expeditious manner. Don't allow or the examiner or customs officer cannot wait or cannot ask the importer or representative, magantay ka. Hindi pwede po. Kailangan po, trabahuin mo kagad yan. 421, Ms. Terberano. Okay. Mr. Bereno, have you read the provisions in advance? Nakapagbasa ka ba ng advance from 414 or 415 to 436? Hindi base. Hindi mo nabasa yung 424? Hindi mo nabasa yan? Assignment ninyo, inabot siya hanggang 436. Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Hindi nyo nabasa yan? Mr. Pineda, nabasa mo yung 424. Oh. Ikaw, Ms. Silvestre, have you read 421 up to and 424? Okay. Ms. Silvestre and Mr. Pineda, what's the difference between 421 and 424? Yes? Yes po, yan po ang main difference. In 421 and 424, they are both customs officers. In 421, it is the duties of a customs officer. While in 424, it is the duties or it is the duty of a customs appraiser. They are different work. So, wag na natin pong isa-isahin yan, ano? Okay, determine. O, yan. Letter A, examination po. When you examine Miss Silvestre, what is in your hand? Assuming, ito Miss Silvestre, ito yung pakete, no? Miss Silvestre, this is the package that you are going to examine. Bubuksan mo, right? And when you conduct the examination, what do you do with the contents and what paper are you going to compare the contents into the paper in your hand or in your hands? Paano mo matitignan? Paano mo matitignan? Oh, ito, nakikita nyo to, guys? Miss Silvestre, nakikita nyo to? Oh, this is the package. This is the package to be examined plus document. And this document consists of goods declaration, bill of lading, commercial invoice, and packing list. Compare what is declared here to what you are going to find out in the examination. That's how you examine. Pag wala nito, how can you examine, right? Pag wala nito, how can you find out if the contents of this document is true, right? So therefore, dalawa po yan. Buksan mo, then at the same time, compare it with the documents in your hand, right, Mr. Desre? So letter B, take sample if it is necessary. And the taking of sample is not for the discretion of the examiner, but the reason for taking it is, again, difficult to classify it, difficult to appraise it, and therefore, the sample shall be submitted for laboratory analysis. Letter C, whenever samples are taken, then it is a requirement that the examiner should issue an acknowledgement receipt. Letter D, in case there is no discrepancy as to what has been examined and what is found, the back page of the goods declaration should be made or should be indicated with the report of the examiner. Ang tawag po doon, examiner's return and findings po. Dapat po kung ano yung nakita niya, report whether the goods have been correctly declared. How can you say as an examiner that the report or that the goods declaration or that the report is in consonance with what you have found and with what have been declared? Checkin mo to at checkin mo yung laman. Did you get it? Yan lang po ang trabaho ng examiner. Now, failure on the part of the examiner to perform any of this, then The examiner can be subject of an administrative action or even criminal action under the last paragraph po. Statutory offenses of a customs employee po. Pag hindi mo nagawa yan. 422, Mr. Verano. So, very simple, simple as this. Whenever the examiner conducts a physical examination, the examiner has to, okay, move from the BOC to the warehouse where the goods to be examined, is located. Sabihin, Mr. Relevo, ikaw ay examiner. Ang Bureau of Customs sa bahay ninyo. Ang i-examine mo, San Fernando, La Union, yung location ng goods. Mr. Relevo, nandiyan ka ba? Mr. Relevo, mamamasahe ka, kakain ka. Tama ba, Mr. Relevo? From your place up to San Fernando, mag-i-examine ka. Tama ba, Mr. Relevo? Okay. Now, sino sasagot ng pamasahe mo? Importer po ang sasagot yan. Importer or the representative of the importer. Dadalhin ka niyan from your place, from the office place, up to where the goods are located. Sagot po yan ni importer. Okay? Pagbalik po, sagot pa rin niya. Tandaan niyo yan. As an examiner. Okay? Maliwanag po. Normal na practice po, pag yung examiner, kinuha mo dun sa may bandang Mabalacat at dinala mo sa San Fernando, doon nag-examine, sagot po ng importer yung back and forth expenses niya. Now, with respect to storage charges, alam niyo naman ng rule, no payment of storage charges, no payment of port charges, no release po. Maliwanag po? Yan po ang rule. Maliwanag po, as long the storage charges or other port charges is not paid or were not paid, then the Bureau of Customs can withhold the goods. Hindi po pakakawalan yan hanggat di ka nakakabayad. Bayad ka muna ng duties and taxes plus other charges or incidental charges. That's the rule. Maliwanag? Maliwanag po. No payment of storage charges, no payment of other incidental charges incurred by the Bureau of Customs, no release. Ganun lang kasimple. Bago pakawalan yung shipment mo, then, you have to pay first. 423, Miss Piñon. Miss Piñon. Yes, go ahead, 423. De minimi lang po, silent S po, de minimi value. What do you mean by de minimi value, Miss Piñon? Wala ka idea? Mr. Pineda, what do you mean by the minimum value? Small value po, small value. And under the CMTA, it is the minimum value when the FOB or FCA value does not exceed 10,000 pesos. Or, ano po? 10,000 and below? Then, that is to be considered the minimum value. And what is the effect? If the shipment's value, either FOB or FCA, is 10,000 pesos and below, no duties and taxes shall be collected. Right, Mr. Pineda? And this 10,000 pesos FOB or FCA value shall be subject to adjustment every 3 years from date of the effectivity of this law. By whom? By who? By the Secretary of Finance. And whenever Secretary of Finance increases, adjusts the 10,000 pesos, it shall be based upon the CPI as published by the PSA. Tama, Mr. Pineda? Now, Section 424. So, ganun lang po kasimple yan. Pag 10,000 and below FOB po, ang value ng goods po, okay, it is covered by the minimum value and therefore no duties and taxes shall be collected. More than that, no more de minimis. Tama, Mr. Pineda? FOB or FCA, 424. O ito po, ang trabaho naman po dito, okay, is the customs appraiser. Miss Silvestre, when you do the function of 424, parehas din po ba? Dalawa po ba tinitignan mo? Hindi po. Kasi po pag appraiser po, hindi po nakatingin yan sa package po or laman. Wala po siyang examination power. Ang hawak niya lang po, papel po. Papel. Ito po yung harapan ng goods declaration at titingnan niya po yung findings or report ng examiner. Meaning, Silvestre, ang hawak lang po ni appraiser po is only a documents. Documents such as goods declaration, bill of lading, invoice, and packing list po. Wala po siyang, hindi po niya nakita yung goods. Ang makakakita lang po ng goods is the examiner po. Did you get it, Ms. Silvestre? So, the report of the examiner shall now be used by the customs appraiser in performing section 424. Ano po yon? Classification, appraisal, including computation of duties and taxes. Ang examiner po, walang hawak na calculator. Ang appraiser po, meron. Tama, Ms. Silvestre? Okay. Did you get it? Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Okay, kung ikaw pa pipiliin, Mr. Pineda, examiner or appraiser? Yung iba, examiner. Ayaw nila ng appraiser kasi ang examiner, nakikita niya mismo yung kargamento because the examiner normally examines physically. Yung iba naman, gusto appraiser, mas maganda daw pakinggan. Okay? Ang appraiser, hindi naman makahingi ng sample, ang examiner nakakahingi ng sample. Tama, Mr. Pineda? Pag sumabog yung kargamento, safe si appraiser, yung examiner, patay. Tama, Mr. Pineda? Okay, 425, Mr. Berano. Am I done already with this, Mr. Pineda? Tapos na ba ako dito? Yes, I have already discussed this because I have discussed to you on how to prepare request for tentative assessment or release. Tama po ba? Again, Miss Season? Miss Season, what are the common issues in the tentative assessment or release? Ms. Silvestre, can you repress the memory of Ms. Season, Ms. Silvestre? The following are the common issues in a tentative assessment. Number 1, misclassification or classification, valuation, certificate of origin, other issues such as freight, insurance, and adjustment po. And the following are the conditions in a tentative assessment. Number 1, Ms. Silvestre, the shipment is not a subject of an alert order. Number 2, the shipment has not violated any of the provision of the CMTA, including its IRR. Number 3, the importer is willing to pause a cash ban or any form of security. So that is 425. Without any of those conditions, then there can be no tentative assessment. And normally, the security or cash ban to be posted by the importer requesting for a tentative assessment is equivalent to the difference as declared and as found. Yan po madalas. Maliwanag, Ms. Silvestre? Ms. Sison, do you now remember the common issues, Ms. Sison? Kailan lang yun? Last week lang yata yun. Di ba? Now, Miss Sison and Miss Silvestre, what is the difference between 425 and 426? Miss Silvestre, you? Mr. Relevo? Okay, the issue in 425 is different from the issue in 426. In 425, the issues are classification, valuation, certificate of origin, or other issues. Now, in issue or the issues in 426 is different from 425. The issue are the following: either incomplete information or incomplete documents. Right, Mr. Pineda? Magkaiba po ang issue. So, iba po ang issue. May problema, malaki po ang problema dito sa 425 kasi po may problema sa rate of duty or sa value or sa certificate of origin or other issues po. Medyo malaki. Dito po sa 426, ang problema lang po, kulang lang ng information or kulang lang po yung dokumento ng importer na isinadmit sa Bureau of Customs. That is what? Small issues. That's why, ito po, ang ipinapile po dito, provisional goods declaration for tentative assessment or release. But in both cases, okay, while the case is pending, okay, the importer, pending under 425 and pending under 426, the importer can ask for a tentative assessment or release. Provided yung condition po under 425 is met. Pagdating naman po sa 426, there is an undertaking that the importer shall be completing the information and documents within the 45 days period. Klaro po? 427, Ms. Pinyon. Okay. So when the goods declaration has been subject to an examination and finally appraised and approved by the District Collector of Customs. So, isabihin, dumaan na po na examination, tapos dumaan po ng appraisal sa Customs Appraiser, and the appraiser's return or report has been approved by the District Collector of Customs. It cannot be changed or amended. Ibig sabihin yan, if there is an approval, whether there is no change regarding examiner's report and appraiser's report, there was no change and it was approved by the district. Or if there was a modification made by the district and it was also approved by the same district collector of customs, as a general rule, that approval shall no longer be changed or altered. General rule lang po dyan. But it can be changed or modified or altered within in any of the following circumstances. Number one po, kung inaprubahan ni district, hindi na po pwedeng baguhin yan. That is only a general rule. But under any of the following circumstances, it can still be changed. Number one, within 1 year, from date of payment or final payment of duties and taxes, and upon statement of error, ibig sabihin po, nagkamali po yung appraiser, nagkamali po yung examiner, at nagkamali po si District Collector of Customs. And it is now the District Collector of Customs who is altering it or modifying of what he or she has already approved. Imagine, ano? Inaprubahan mo, tapos ngayon, within a year, okay, binabago mo. Number 2, within 15 days. O, ibig sabihin po niyan, dun sa number 1 po, the District Collector of Customs can amend or can modify it within 15 or within 1 year from date of final payment of duties and taxes. However, in number 2, it can still be changed or altered or modified by the same official, District Collector of Customs. And that District Collector of Customs who approved it first, is now asking for reclassification and appraisal. And the request is addressed to the Commissioner of Customs. Biro mo inaprubahan mo. Ngayon, later on, there was a change of mind. Sabi niya, mukha yatang mababa. Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Mr. Pineda? Yes. Anong tingin mo dito sa District Collector under number 2? Kung ikaw si Commissioner, kung ikaw si Commissioner, Mr. Pineda, at ako si District Collector of Customs, and I am requesting you, Mr. Commissioner, to have a reclassification, a reappraisal of what I have already approved. Would I look incompetent or competent to you? Magmumukha ba kung incompetent or competent sa'yo, Mr. Commissioner Pineda? Incompetent. Inaprubahan mo nung una, tapos ngayon sasabihin mo, mababa yung inaprubahan mo. O, di ba? Ms. Sylvester, tama ba? Yes, kasi bakit nung una inaprubahan mo, tapos ngayon binabago mo yung inaprubahan mo? If I were the Commissioner, bakit ganon, District? Inaprubahan mo ngayon and later on, you are asking for reclassification and reappraisal. So, ibig sabihin, yung inaprubahan niya, Mr. Pineda and Mr. Relebo, mali yung inaprubahan niya. Tama po ba? Tama ba, Mr. Pineda? Yes, mali po yung inaprubahan nga. Ngayon, nagre-request ka kay Commissioner, nakikiusap ka, Mr. Commissioner, let us reclassify and reappraise what I have already approved. Ang tanga namang district niyan. Letter 3. In number 3, it is not the District Collector of Customs nor the Commissioner of Customs who is asking. It is what? The interested party. That is what? The importer who is not satisfied with the approval made by the District Collector of Customs. Anong nangyari? Tumaas po ang babayaran ni importer. Kaya po, through timely protest, timely protest addressed to the District Collector of Customs, the importer, the interested party, is asking for reclassification or reappraisal of the goods declaration wherein it was already approved by the district. And that interested party is hoping for what? A good or a favorable decision. Maaring baguhin na yung inapprove ni district. Dati itinaas, baka ibaba. Kaya po nagre-request si Mr. Interested Party. Maliwanag po. So in number 1 and 2, it is the number 1 and 2, it is the district collector who is asking for modification or alteration of what he or she has already approved. In number 3, it is the importer who is asking for modification or alteration of what has already been approved by the district through a timely protest. So, Mr. District, mali yung ginawa mo, mali yung pagtaas mo. Letter D, in this time, it is not a request, but it is an order by the Commissioner of Customs, Mr. District. Mali ang appraisal or classification mo. So, it is now the Commissioner of Customs who is demanding that what has been approved by the District Collector of Customs is to be modified or to be altered. Kasi mali po si district. Did you get it? So, 1, 2, 3, 4 are those instances that the approved appraisal, approved assessment, and computation of duties and taxes by the district, aprobado na, pero babaguhin pa rin. Either within 1 year, within 15 days, and upon request of an interested party, and lastly, upon demand of the Commissioner of Customs. Did you get it? Okay. Is there any question so far? Miss Sison, do you have any question? What time is it, Miss Silvestre? 12 na. Okay, so I gave you an assignment regarding de minimis value, right? Tama ba? Binigyan ko kayo ng assignment. Tama ba? It's COW 2000, those 2016 and CMO 28-2016. Have you received the copy? Or have you received my instruction to secure a copy, Mr. Pineda? Mr. Pineda, meron na kayong instruction ko na secure a copy of CAO. Pakitanong mo na lang sa 3A. Maliwanag? So, this afternoon, I will continue with 428 up to 436. Maliwanag po, guys? Maliwanag po? Okay, you're dismissed. And I will see you again this 1 o'clock. Maliwanag po. Miss Pinyon, maliwanag. Miss Pinyon, recess na. You're dismissed and see you at around 1:05 po.